Morning everyone, and welcome back to the Runpreneur vlog, where we discuss all things entrepreneurship and running. It's a very misty, cold morning today. Feels like it's about 1 degree, so quite fresh, but it does feel cold because of the foggy mist, but okay to run in. And it is Thursday Tales today, where we talk about past experiences in business. And today's topic is the rent-to-rent model in property. So as always, if you like this episode, please give it a like and a subscribe, and let's get started. So the rent-to-rent model, this is something that I suppose from a property perspective only really reared its head maybe in the last 7 years or so. I think before that it was done quite commonly in the commercial setting, but not so much in the residential. So I think I was starting to do this maybe 7 to 8 years ago. I think I started getting involved in rent to rent, and at my peak I think I had 13 rent to rent properties under my management. Now, what is rent to rent and why is it such a viable strategy? What are the kind of pros and cons of it? What are the risks? I'll just give you my kind of experiences with it, so you can kind of make your own determination whether it's a strategy you want to pursue. Just got a car coming, 1 second. So first and foremost, it is pretty much what it says it is, in that you're renting a property to rent it out. So it's basically like subletting if you're going to break it down. So the first thing to consider is you cannot do this type of agreement on a short hold tenancy agreement like you would normally do with your tenants, because it's against the legislation and the rules and regulations to sublet on an assured short hold tenancy agreement. So it needs to be a management agreement, which is point number one when you set these up. But why do people, I'll go into the nuances a little bit more in a minute, but why do people do it? Well, clearly it is a low money down property strategy. I mean, it can even be a no money down property strategy, but because ultimately the dream is to find a property, pay whatever the rent is, and then rent it out for a bit more and make your margin. Now, obviously, it's how you structure the deal, and I think with any deal, you can be quite creative with these management agreements, which are one of the main reasons you use them as opposed to an assured short hold tenancy agreement, because you can structure them basically any way you want. It's what the heads of terms of the agreement. Get the buy-in from the other side, and if everybody's happy with the terms, you draw it up and you can sign it. And a few things to kind of consider here is that people think it's a no money down strategy, but you could have a deposit to pay, you could have rental fee rent in advance to pay, you could have some light refurbishment works to do before you can even get tenants in. You've got to cover the cost of the rent if it takes you longer to get the property tenanted than you predicted. So all these things can rack up to a few £1,000s if you're not careful. So really going in with your eyes open and looking at worst case scenario is really important here. The other consideration is obviously, to get a deal that works, there needs to be sufficient margin between what you can rent it out as compared to what the current owner is going to get in terms of rent from you. And that's why the rent to HMO model, or the rent to serviced accommodation model, became so kind of I'm trying to think of the word, attractive to the typical investor, because it's you're taking a property and then you had a mechanism to get a significantly higher rental income from them than what renting out as a single let tenancy, which pretty much is what the current owner is doing. Now the downside to this, HMO is house of multiple occupation, so that's when you're renting rooms or shared accommodation, so you're having multiple tenants live in the same house under individual agreements. And rent to SA is rent to serviced accommodation, so that's where you're putting it on your kind of online travel agencies like your booking.coms, Airbnbs, and renting technically by the night. So you do either of those strategies right, you can make a significant margin on a rent to rent deal. Now my model was always rent to HMO, because at the time I had a big HMO portfolio I think I had, I was growing it at the time when I started getting involved in these deals, and you know, at the peak we had 40 odd HMOs, and we don't have anywhere near that many now because we've changed strategy to the kind of 2 squared model. That's the other option. You can do rent to 2 squared as well, which is another really viable option. Although, again, it's putting 2 tenants into a property as opposed to 4 or 5 is what you'd probably do in an HMO. And you've got to know your numbers on this, because you know the problem that you have with rent-to-rent strategies is that inevitably the rent that you're going to be paying is always going to be significantly higher than what you pay on a mortgage if you're acquiring the property, you know, in your own right. So it means that it's hard to get deals to stack. There's always less kind of buffer for things to go wrong, because in property stuff always goes wrong, and you need to always be prepared for worst case. A boiler breaks down, who pays for that, you know? Now the good thing about rent to rent is still the existing landlord's property, so if you're clever about how you structure the maintenance side of things, you can get them to foot the bill for a significant amount of the maintenance side of things. But it might be that the deal rests upon you having to cover the maintenance costs, which, you know what, if there's sufficient margin in, that's okay. You know, again, this is where it comes into a negotiation ploy. You've also got to consider, if you're managing it and the landlord's going to pay for maintenance, it's how much that's going to slow the process up of getting, you know, maintenance jobs sorted when you've got tenants that are kind of unhappy with regards to maintenance outstanding issues. It might take your landlord ages to get them done. So all these types of things are considerations, especially if you're going to be managing the properties yourself. And but again, it comes down to heads of terms, what you negotiate with the landlord. And I think the key is to kind of look at worst case scenario. You know, obviously worst case being there's a fire or some kind, then you know, make sure the insurance is in place from you as a managing agent, and sufficient insurance is in place from the existing owner as the landlord, in terms of what your strategy is. So if you are running it as service accommodation, make sure that the existing landlord has an insurance policy which covers him for that type of usage of the property. Otherwise, if something goes wrong, he could be massively out of pocket, especially if your insurance product doesn't pay. So you want to make sure that you're always prepared in worst case. But then other than that, you know, you've got maintenance, you've got voids, and voids are going to be your, most of the time to get these types of deals to work, you need to take them on a longer term. So that's where it can be quite attractive to the existing landlord for why they're going to let to you, which you'd be seen as a higher risk than a typical single let tenant, because of you're going to be doing a creative strategy on it ultimately, as far as they see. An HMO service accommodation is something that they would deem to be high risk. So you obviously need to appease that level of risk. And one way of doing that is to offer them a guaranteed rent. So regardless of whether it's tenanted or not, you're going to be paying them a rent over a period of time. Sometimes you may need to show proof of funds and things to evidence that they're happy with that, or doing a, you know, having some form of rent guarantee insurance policy in place can also help the landlord significantly. It might be that you have to pay for him to have that if he's not confident that you have the financial power to commit to such a term, or commit to much a financial commitment. So these are kind of things to consider. But the other thing to kind of consider as well is you can, when you get this model right, you can scale up quite quickly. And I had 13 rent-to-rents at my peak, and I probably took them all on in the space of maybe 3 or 4 months. So it was quite quick. And the reason I took them on was, as I was always acquiring my assets. However, when you get to a stage where you can't recycle funds out of your existing portfolio, it's cyclical, you know, in terms of putting out equity to reinvest. You're waiting, you're stuck in redemption penalties, houses haven't gone up enough, then how do you continue to grow? And this is a really good mechanism to keep growing your cash flow in those times where you can't continue to buy. The issue is that you know, from my perspective, is that I took on quite a lot in a short space of time. And when you start kind of getting to the realms of, I was running them all as HMOs, so you start looking at 13. I didn't have 40 at the time, so I was still growing, but I was probably 30 or 40 approaching when I added those 13 to the kind of table. And as a result, you end up very quickly with kind of like 200 tenants. and you don't have to make sure you've got the infrastructure to kind of manage them. You're not flooding the market with HMOs if you're buying them or taking on these rent-to-rents in the same area. So these are all kind of considerations that you need to kind of take into play. How big do you want to go? How much capacity have you got for management? And people get kind of blindsided by this, because generally once you get your first rent-to-rent deal over the line, you've kind of overcome a lot of the obstacles that you're going to get with most, and then negotiations become easier. I mean, I suppose I had it relatively easy. I found a landlord, and you know, once we did the first one, it was quite good because I was renting to kind of social housing sector, which I had experience in, still have experience in. The existing landlord had a stock of properties, so any that weren't up to kind of high level for kind of the professional market, he would offer to me, and I would spruce them up to the safe, clean, functional level, and then I would rent them out to the kind of social housing market in my strategy. So it worked quite nicely. So I ended up getting a flow from him, and I also had some letting agents who tested the model with me, and because it worked and it was kind of no drama for them, they started offering me deals when they get properties that are a little bit rough around the edges, that were more challenging to rent out to the professional market. They would offer to me because I could get them into my model for the social housing market sector in an ethical way, because you have to always look at cost viability. It was always safety is number one priority. Make sure that all the regulations are up to speed, make sure everything's functional, so there's nothing broken in there at all. And number three is clean. So what I mean by that is if you get dated wallpaper or some carpet which is a horrible colour, if it worked and I could clean it up, I wouldn't replace it. So it might not aesthetically look beautiful, but it was completely compliant, completely functional and completely clean, and that was always the model for the social housing sector that I kind of adopted. Otherwise you can spend a fortune on properties, they might not be treated as well as a professional tenant would, not in all circumstances, but just my kind of experience, and then you're spending more on properties, you know, keeping in the maintenance budgets than you need to, because you need to make it a viable proposition. And I always said that if you have a tenant that is has proved themselves over the course of time, then you can gradually improve things. If they want things done to the properties, that's when you look to invest in them, because that's where you want to turn that kind of tenant from being a tenant into somebody who's treating the property as their home. So that's a really, really important part there. So what happened and what kind of went wrong? Well, for me, what went wrong is that I ended up having too many tenants, too many properties, and as much as I have really good, robust systems and processes in place, I didn't back then, and it ended up getting overwhelming and very, very difficult to manage. So I had to kind of pull out of a lot of my rent-to-rent deals as I scaled back the size of my HMO portfolio. I've now got, I think, maybe 5 HMO properties left from 40. I haven't sold all the properties, but I've converted them to 2 square, which is basically taking them from kind of four to kind of 5 tenants in every house, and switched it over to just 2. And you've more than halved the number of tenants to manage with the similar number of stock. The rent-to-rent deals that were becoming less profitable, because when you start getting a huge number of tenants, and if you're not managing them as effectively as you once were, you know, you start getting more issues with management, more issues with maintenance, which eats into your margin. And already a rent-to-rent deal has less margin in it than a property that we own. So we made that decision not so long ago. So the kind of summary here is it's a really viable strategy when you're getting started, if you want to grow. But if you're going for most people will be going for a rent to HMO or rent to SA type model. I would consider the rent to 2 squared. It's a little bit harder because the rents are slightly lower than you'll get in others, but it's a much more sustainable, easier kind of strategy to kind of manage and to scale up. You've got to remember, every time you get an HMO, it's 4 or 5 tenants. Your tenant numbers go up. You just need over 2 and you've got 10 tenants, and you know, it goes up really quick. And you might think, oh, 10. We always worked on a run rate of 1 in 15 tenants would be a problematic one that we'd have to deal with, which, to be fair, is a very low number, and it's really good because our vetting procedures were always good. But when you start having 200 tenants, there's a lot of 15s there, which equals a lot of problematic tenants. And one problematic tenant can take up a significant amount of focus, energy, evictions, all these types of things that kind of come with it. So if you're going for the rent to HMO model, you want to take it slow and steady and make sure, you know, a lot of people go into the professional sector. Again, that's fine, and a lot of people do very well in it. You still get issues. I've got professional HMOs and you still get issues with them. Okay, so don't think that it's going to be a much more watertight model than the social HMO model. Now it is, don't get me wrong, in terms of ease of running, but if you duplicate the numbers, or you know, you're going to have the same challenges with a professional one as you will with the social. And the other downside with the professional ones is generally you'll need to do more work up front, or to get them to the standard to compete with a more kind of competitive market. There's far more professional HMOs out there than there are social housing, so much so that you can end up, you know, I've got a constant flow of tenants for my social housing stock, just from referrals from kind of charities, housing options teams, you know, job centres, these types of things. Whereas you go to a lot of areas, they're saturated with professional HMOs, and it can be quite hard to get them fully occupied all the time. So these are considerations, but you'll only know that when you do your area. So if I was to summarise, rent to rent is a really valuable toolkit. It's part of your toolkit, a property strategy within your toolkit, that if you haven't got money to invest, it's a great way to grow your cash flow. Okay, they are notoriously harder to find because of the nuances and the fact that they're not a standard tenancy. You've got to overcome all the obstacles and objections that anybody who you're negotiating with would need. Letting agents in particular, they think, oh, a management agreement, it's like subletting. So they're technically managing on behalf of the owner, and then you're then managing on behalf of them. So it's subletting and that side of things. But they also can potentially see you as a competitor because you're managing properties like what they do. So that's something to consider. And how you can kind of overcome that. So it's building relationships, building trust with the stakeholders involved. What I would recommend is that you always do a detailed head to terms, preparing for worst case scenario, and put that into your management contract so you're protecting. And that's worst case scenario from your perspective and from the other side, so that all of your fears are alleviated, and try and come to some kind of compromise. If you're trying to force the deal and there's a little bit not happening for one side or the other, don't be afraid to walk away. There'll always be other deals, and you don't want to be tied into something which is too aggressively weighted on one side. And the final one is like I say, you know, if you're doing even rent to service accommodation, okay, technically that is a more scalable model because you're using kind of cleaners as your managers, and you know, you're switching over properties, but the upfront costs of setting up an SA unit, you means that you need to get that return really quick. Otherwise it's anything but no money or low money down. I mean, a lot of people take finance out on furnishing and dressings and all this stuff, and I've done that in the past. Notoriously expensive, and you constantly have to pay for it. And service accommodation is very up and down in terms of seasonal output, unless you're very, very good at it. So be very careful when you're adopting that model, which is why I went for the rent to HMO model. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me today. I've kind of waffled on about this and given you my kind of thoughts on the process. Absolutely, it's an extremely effective strategy, but use it at the right time and use it sensibly, and don't think that it's just easy. I don't own that property, because you have a lot of legal responsibility with it, and it's making sure you do the right thing by yourself and also by the other side, whether that's the landlord or the letting agent. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me today. Hopefully that's giving you a little bit of an insight into kind of rent to rent model. And as always, got any questions on this, drop me a comment, I'll respond to every one. If it's a bigger question, I'll do a separate vlog episode and tag you in. If this is not relevant to you, just unfollow me. It'll stop cluttering up your personal feeds. But before you do that, please check out the Runpreneur YouTube channel, because I talk about different topics on every day of the week. So just because today's isn't relevant doesn't mean that tomorrow or the day after is very, very relevant to you. So you want to check out the playlist there. It's all catalogued nice and neatly for you. And yeah, also check out the link in my bio where I start hosting my free resources. The first one is my social media checklist for repurposing all my content across all platforms. So if you want to do more of that, you want to see the process I follow for this vlog, check that out. It's completely free. So yeah, so all left to say is that the Runpreneur vlog was set up to help entrepreneurs, business owners overcome the emotions of stress, overwhelm and anxiety by using exercise as a release mechanism. And what I mean by that is that I use running in my case, but it's just having that mental release every day to relieve the pressures that are in the form of stress on a daily or weekly basis, which just allows you to kind of process and analyse things more effectively and gain clarity and focus and stay in control of what you're doing. If you don't have that release mechanism, these stresses come every day. They build up and build up and build up. And if you don't have a release mechanism, it's like pressure in a pipe. It builds and builds and builds and the pipe bursts. And what happens then is the entrepreneur has a breakdown or the business breaks down. And either or is often terminal to the likelihood of your business lasting the test of time. So I've been there. I've lost multiple businesses because of my inability to deal with this, and I've lost multiple business partners because of it, and I've almost been bankrupt because of it. And it's really, really dark place to go as an entrepreneur. It takes a long time to get back up. So I wouldn't wish it upon my kind of worst enemy. So my pledge to you is that I have this kind of process now where I'm doing this run and vlog every day, and it's really helping me on my journey. And as a result, I've made more progress in the last 6 months than I have in the previous 3 or 4 years. And there's no coincidence that's when I started the vlog and the running routine into my life. So my pledge to you is, if you are somebody who's struggling with this stuff, just drop me a message. There's no catch here whatsoever. I'm not looking to sell you anything or anything. I'll jump on a call and I'll give you a few hints and tips and things you can implement into your daily routines, weekly routines, that can make a massive difference and get you back on the right path. And many of you have taken me up on this already, and I know that we've made significant positive inroads into a lot of entrepreneurs already. So don't be stubborn, don't be too pride. The help is there, you just have to reach out for it. So on that note, all I have to say is that if you like this episode, please give it a like, a comment and a subscribe. If you want to see similar content, please check out the playlist link on the YouTube channel. And all that's left to say is, as always, stay positive, stay happy, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.